And you can find out more by going to halftime.org. Good morning, Lloyd. How are you doing?
Doing great. Good to be with you. Thanks for partnering up with me in this. Thanks for your friendship.
Well, it's always a privilege. Now, I've really been enjoying the fall weather, and I was telling you earlier about a fun thing that we were doing, but I just heard you returned from a silent retreat with other halftimers. Now, what was that like?
Yeah, well, it's a really good discipline in halftime and beyond to take a day, a year, or in my case, I do 3 silent days each year to just get away and really listen to your heart, listen to the Lord and what He's saying. And if you've got some other halftime alumni or friends around that are on the same kind of journey, listen to them and what's going on in their life. And so this time we did something interesting, Doug. We took 3 days. The first day was silent, alone. We would have meals together and share what we were hearing from the Lord and encourage each other. But the second and third day were a blend of reading and learning and discussion, exercise, nutrition, sleep. We brought by Zoom. We brought in some really amazing trainers and yoga. And yesterday I had 25,600 steps on my watch here. So as you can imagine, I'm sore pretty much everywhere. But talk about 3 incredibly rich and re-energizing days to be with like-minded people, having meaningful conversations, going deep, challenging each other, and getting our minds and bodies back in shape. So that was the last few days of my journey.
Well, that sounds like something worth doing, and I know I enjoyed my silent retreat and look forward to doing another one. Lloyd, I'm especially like this topic that we're working on, and I wanted to kind of start out maybe with two questions. First, how would you summarize our discussion on the three most common mistakes at halftime? And second, was there one memorable insight that Bob Buford, our founder, shared with you that you were particularly grateful for?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, Doug, you and I have talked a bit about this, that in any discipline, any new discipline you're learning, there are likely common mistakes that people repeatedly fall into that they could avoid if they just could learn from others who have gone ahead of them. And so we feel like we have the privilege of being on this journey with hundreds and hundreds of others and looking over their shoulders, seeing what are the common pitfalls that they just step into inadvertently that would really save them a lot of heartache, or what you might call the dumb tax, that tax you pay in life for things that you just didn't know or think of. There are probably 10 or 12 common mistakes that I've seen, but there are three that really stand out at the top of the list. The first one is just not taking the time to get clear on your calling. And as a result, you take on things that are good, but not the best, not the great. The second one is not gaining alignment with the stakeholders in your life. And there are many stakeholders in your life. And alignment doesn't mean you're doing the same things. But, you and I get our car aligned, or at least in older versions of vehicles, you'd take your car in for an alignment. And it was to make sure that the wheels are all running in parallel. And it doesn't mean that each wheel's doing the same thing, but they're in parallel. They're not conflicting with each other. And the third is not getting clear on some kind of finish line, having an answer to the question, how much is enough? Which seems like we will never have the freedom to be all in pursuing our calling if we haven't created some kind of finish line for how much money, how much lifestyle, how much acclaim, how much leisure. There's power in that, setting a limit. So back to your question though about Bob, probably the most surprising and memorable thing that he instilled in me around one of these common mistakes was, in the latter years of his life, he studied humanities. He had a professor from University of Texas come to his office regularly and teach him poetry, Shakespeare, lots of things that at the time, as a 40-something-year-old, I thought was a little bit maybe unproductive or a little bit soft or whatever. But, it gave him great wisdom and insight. And one day he told me about a translation of a French poem, which said something like that when you discover your destiny or your calling, if you don't follow it, it follows you like an accusing shadow. Now, if you can imagine, a shadow, we've got two granddaughters, and it's fun to watch them because on a sunny day, if they're walking, outside with the sun over their shoulder, they notice their shadow and it follows them. Can you imagine your destiny following you like an accusing shadow because you're not living it out? The flip side is, can you imagine just meandering through life without the clarity of your destiny, with no shadow following you? I mean, which would be worse, right? Not living out your destiny if you really knew it, or just not even taking the time to get clear on it. And so that was certainly something that, Doug, I'd like to go back and find that French poem, because we have a daughter in France that's with Campus Crusade and speaks fluent French. And I went to McGill University in Montreal, so got a bunch of French in my system in those years. And so that really, does that strike you as a pretty powerful idea from that poem?
It really does. And it harkens back to some of the things that I have seen in my journey, as friends have pointed out. What I'm doing now, they were kind of like, oh, I could see that when we were in grammar school.
Wow, interesting. Yeah, and you can't get away from it, right? It's in you. And, I woke up this morning early up in the mountains of North Carolina to drive down here to do this together with you. And I was as excited this morning as I think I was the first time, that Bob and I did a halftime event. That's when it's something that's just in your DNA. It was assigned to you by the designer and creator of the world, and it'll give you sustaining power. So let's dive into that a little bit, these three a little bit deeper then, Doug. So the first and by far and away the most common mistake is to not really get clear on your calling. And the temptation is to dabble in things and to work on the solution too quickly. And as you've probably heard as a halftime alumni, the halftime journey, this journey of reinvention, is more akin to archaeology than architecture. It's about taking the time to really look inside and get clear on who you are, and then look around at the work you've been given and sink yourself into it. If you are moving into your next season without that clarity and you start taking on commitments, you will become sloppy busy. And sloppy busy can be somewhat unfulfilling because it doesn't seem to have the focus, leverage, and intentionality that you might have experienced in growing your business or pursuing a successful career. And secondly, it's not likely to be sustainable. There's so many off ramps on the journey to significance that you need to be rooted in your calling. It's like a keel in my sailboat. When the wind of life blows across the deck, the keel keeps the boat going forward as opposed to drifting from side to side around the lake. The thing that's really most profound about this is not just our observation of this as a mistake, but it's a clear directive in the Bible to slow down and do a deep dive into it. And I want to just quote for you some verses from Galatians 6, verse 4 and 5 in the Message translation. It says, "Make a careful exploration of who you are and the work you've been given, and sink yourself into it. Don't be impressed with yourself. Don't compare yourself with others. Each of us must take responsibility for doing the creative best we can with our own life." Now, it's interesting that Paul breaks it down into three components: careful exploration of who I am and who you are. That's one standalone piece. And then the work you've been given. That's about looking around and seeing what God's doing, looking around and seeing the needs that are out there, looking for other people who are doing what you feel you're called to do, and finding them and learning from them and building a network and a tribe for your next season. and then sink yourself into it. In other words, don't dabble in this. Give this your full attention. In order to do that, you have to create freedom. And freedom always requires setting a limit in your life. Now, part of this mystery then is hidden inside you. Part of it takes intentional looking around, exploring, doing low cost probes. And then the other part is staying in it. So the disciplines, the daily spiritual disciplines, the yearly disciplines, like the silent retreat I mentioned, that will help you stay in the game and stay focused when probably the biggest temptation for you and I, Doug, at this season of life is just comfort. I mean, you just got back from a camping retreat in another part of the mountains of the Blue Ridge, right? And you were
Yeah.
talking about elk and just the beauty of it. You could just get sucked in by just too much comfort, right? And goofing off.
Oh, without a doubt. But how refreshing it was.
So this wonderful balance, right?
Hmm.
And that's actually what I want to talk about together next is in Matthew 11, 28. I don't know if these verses really grabbed you, Doug, the way they grabbed me. Where Jesus said this. Again, it's in the Message translation. So to make it as accessible to you and I. Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me. You'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me, work with me, watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. Now, that phrase has been my watchword for this 2020 year. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. I mean, this is a journey, right, with God, Doug, and He is guiding us. He said, I'll guide you with my eye. And Jesus said, I have come so that you might have life and live it to the full. So, the very most common mistake that we make at halftime is not taking the time to get clear on our calling. And we rob ourselves of the joy of this unforced rhythm of grace, of knowing our calling and living it out, and the freedom to say no to so many other things that are good but not great. So, Doug, let's go on to the second most common mistake, which is not getting aligned with the stakeholders in your life. I can remember when I started this journey, I came home to Linda and I said, hey, honey, if we could live simply, we can live on what we have the rest of our life and do whatever God wants us to do. And inside, even though I was talking to her, inside, I was really just thinking about me. What am I going to do next? What's going to bring me more fulfillment? And that was really as big as it got for me. It didn't dawn on me that unless I had alignment with these stakeholders in my life, it probably wouldn't be sustainable. But not only that, I would miss out on the joy of having their buy-in and having their wind as a wind at my back, or even, and then lastly, this is not about me. If my life is going to be about significance, right, for you and I, it's going to be about the stakeholders of our life first. So, I mean, I made such a sort of a bozo mistake in doing this, and you don't have to make that mistake. Now, I want to hear about your stakeholders, but for me, the stakeholders, Doug, were first and foremost my business partner. I mean, if I felt called to make a change, it was going to change everything in our business model because of how we shared responsibilities. And so I had to really sit down, and it was important to sit down and have an open-handed conversation with him with full respect for the commitments I've made to him and his role and what God wants him to do, and to come to alignment. And I remember him saying to me at one point, Lloyd, if God is calling you to do something else, go do it, and I will run these buildings. And for 25 years now, he has managed our business. And he sends me an email every month and tells me about the cash flow. And then he is a wind at my back. He knows what I'm called to do, and I know what he's called to do. And it's brought us closer together, even over these last 25 years of journeying together. The other stakeholders were Linda, my kids, my parents, my brothers, and my friends. My brothers were affected by this. I sent a 3-page letter to my mom and dad in 1993, and I got a note back from my dad. I got a conversation with him. I never heard from my mom ever about that 3-page letter. And I wish I had sat down with her and said, Mom, I didn't hear back from you. I poured my heart out into a letter. I still have a copy of it, Doug, here. And actually, it's the original. My dad gave it back to me. I wish I had sat down and built more alignment with my mom. She was hoping that she would have successful kids, and I turned out to be, quote, successful. And I think she was disappointed when I turned my back on them. So tell me about this journey in your journey together with you and Nancy.
Has had its challenges because, like you, I think I recognized when I started to really think about it, pretty much what we wanted to do. However, getting there was just very daunting. We tried a few low-cost probes, and they just didn't seem to get legs. And it was kind of like, well, okay, do we just keep doing this? And we did. I say we because my wife, Nancy, was in there with me and encouraging me and putting up with the low points versus the high points. But after a lot of sheer determination, it started really miraculously coming together, and my friends and family could see the joy that it brought us, and that made it a lot more fun. And there's also a side benefit that it's really helped our family gatherings, as I'm a much better beer and smoked barbecue preparer than ever before. So, it's kind of a win-win all the way around.
I last week I did this, but Linda and I went over to your city, and your son Douglas has an art studio. He's a former Young Life staffer, but he's a amazing artist with wood and engravings and multimedia. And so I just popped in. Of course, it's masks, so you don't know who's who, and got some time to just chat with him. And I said, it's been fun seeing your dad's calling emerge. And he's, first of all, he's totally aware of what you're doing. So that's about alignment, because alignment is about understanding and then negotiating and then being on the same journey together. He's very aware, but he's also excited and inspired by what he's seen in your life in the last 5 or 10 years. And I thought, gosh, that's a great example of building alignment with the stakeholders of your life. And it brings him joy as he sits there. It's interesting because he's a witness in a very popular part of a very popular city in America, using art and his Young Life background. And, but, that was kind of an impromptu discovery that, he's very aware. So let's move on to the third mistake, because we just have a few more minutes. And that is, it's very common to not take the risk and the effort to gain an answer to the question together with your spouse, if you're married, to the question, how much is enough? How much is enough wealth to accumulate? How much is enough to accumulate to pass on to the kids that's actually in their best interest? You and I can do more harm than good by endowing our kids with too much money, right? And robbing them of the joy of accomplishment and dependency on the Lord. And how much lifestyle, how much accomplishment. And so we can just drift without creating a finish line. Then we don't have the real, true emotional and calendar freedom to be all in. Like the Bible said, give careful thought to who you are, the work you've been given, and sink yourself into it. It's hard to sink yourself into it. If you're, the Bible says no one can serve two masters, mammon and God, money, or the whole pursuit of the stuff that comes with money. And that's God telling us you've got to set an answer to the question, how much is enough? So that you can just serve one. You can serve the master. And you can't imagine the freedom you find. Michael Card, one of my favorite lyricist writers, wrote a song 20 years ago. And the line that struck out to me and helped shape my heart is, you can't imagine the freedom you find from the things you leave behind. Now, maybe you're addicted to just one more deal and there's a thrill to the deal, but it's standing in your way of really being all in to your calling. Or maybe there's fear. You grew up poor, or you saw your dad go bankrupt, or there's some shadow over your shoulder about risk, and you just keep accumulating more. Or maybe in a journey of a successful career, your spouse traded the intimacy they really wanted for the lifestyle and perks that came with your career. And it built a lifestyle it's hard to disengage from. And that's a tough conversation, but it's rooted in scripture. So I would encourage each of us to really work on the parts where we haven't set an answer to the question, how much is enough? Of course, Doug, everybody's answer to that is different because each of us is responsible to the Lord. Talk a little bit about what this was like for you guys, because I know this was not easy for you as well. You're a saver by nature, right? Very conservative spender.
Yeah, that was actually one of the toughest parts, is sometimes freeing yourself to spend money. But contentment overall was really important to kind of master. We had to decide financially what was enough, and then as far as the other things go, whether it be travel or other things, what was enough. So before we really jumped into this, we had pretty well defined what our contentment was as best we could. Now, then as I started to jump into my passion, that can be kind of, you really can sink your whole self into it, and maybe a lot more. And it started really
what does that
booming.
look like, Doug, for you? Like, give us an example maybe of
Well,
how that
this week was pretty full. We took a couple of days and went to Cataloochee in North Carolina just to get away from everything, and there's just no internet there, so we had a little bit of a break. But as soon as we got back on Wednesday, I had a 2.5 hour online event from a brewery in Germany, and also another brewery here in the United States, the oldest brewery in the world, and that was really exciting. And of course, this morning we're having this live stream right now, and I have another one. The beer, he's an archaeologist who goes back and looks at even Egyptian beers, and we're going to be talking about George Washington, his porter.
So endlessly fascinating, right? And the work you're doing with Sierra Nevada.
Yeah, I've got something with them. It looks like tomorrow morning. I just got a text while we were talking, and they want me to come back up there to capture some things they're doing with their Celebration Ale, which is a very special beer. So, my wife and I are having to sit back and say, okay, well, which one is more important? Beer archaeologists or breweries in Germany or Sierra Nevada that's right here in the Carolinas. Which one provides long-lasting value? Which one is turning into a job and not a joy?
So let's look at the poll then as we kind of turn our corner here, and we'll spend some time in the first part of the Q&A to talk about the things that are most important from the poll.
All right. So the question was, which of the most important common renewal mistakes is most important for you to improve? There are 3 answers that we gave: getting clear on my calling so I don't say yes to the good things at the expense of the best things. The second was gaining alignment with select stakeholders in my life to honor them and improve the sustainability of my calling. And lastly, working through the question, just how much is enough, so that I have more freedom to focus on my calling and what I value the most. Lord, without a doubt, we have 60% into the answer getting clearer on my calling. That's actually bumping up as we're talking. So it was almost 65%. So clearly getting clearer on my calling so I don't say yes to the good things at the expense of the best.
And what's the next, tell us the rest of the stats.
The other 2 are even. We have both are less than 20% on gaining alignment and working through the question, how much is enough? So this is very, and it continues to grow, almost 70% now getting clearer on my calling. So without a doubt, that's the priority for our audience today.
Good. Now, one of the things about that is over the years, that is something that we've really worked into more of a science than an art. It's not a mystery to go find it. There's two pieces to this. One is the hard work of analytics, the thinking through getting clear on your strengths, working through to discover what you're most passionate about, looking around at what God's doing in the world that you can join him, because that's where you'll gain leverage, and then testing your way into it. That's the systematic approach, and we can help you with that, either through one-on-one coaching, getting you into a 7-meeting, a virtual roundtable that you can do from anywhere that's 2 hours a month, or the Fellows Program, which we do is really rigorous, wonderful program that you can find on halftime.org. There's another part to it, though, that's the mystery part. And after doing a sermon at a big church in Singapore, an old Chinese pastor came up to me and said, "Young man," which, by the way, Doug, I took as a compliment. He said, "Remember that your calling is a gift to receive, not a goal to achieve." Your calling is a gift to receive, not a goal to achieve. So there's a part of this that's about stopping long enough to make eye contact with the Lord. And he'll give you your assignment. In Ephesians 2:10, it says, "For we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which he prepared in advance for you to do." So this is part of what I'm supposed to do right here. And I know because I've done the analytics, but I've also watched God open doors. I've seen him work through me, and it's irrefutable evidence now. And it's truly been a gift to receive. It's not so much a goal to achieve. And it gives so much freedom to just live into it then, knowing that he's going to provide the wisdom and strength to do it well. So I would encourage you to, if you're in that 70% group that you feel like it's still not clear what your calling is, don't fill your life up with good things. Take the time, get the help you need to really get clear. So Doug, let's look at the question, and maybe if you have questions that are on top of mind about the calling, just put them in there for Doug and I, so that we can talk about them together.
And the first one comes from David, and David asks the question, if my life turned out perfectly, what would the elements be? I came up with anywhere from 1 to 100 elements. How do you think through all of this in a meaningful way?
Yeah. Okay. So David, for those of you who may not be familiar with that question, it's a parallel question to the calling question. It's what you might call a metrics question, trying to gain clarity about what you really want at the end of the day. It's hard to build a strategy in life if you're not clear on what your desired results are, just like in a business or a practice. It would be very difficult, right, Doug? In your business, woven electronics, it would be difficult to build a new product strategy if you weren't sure what a win looked like for you. So for David, if you make a list of the things that, you say we're sitting around 30 years from now and talking about the last 30 years of our life, and we were saying, well, wow, it turned out perfectly. How would you know? And so if you have a flood of ideas that come to your mind, then, like David said, write them down. There may be too many. I carry the answer to that question that my daughter Carolyn wrote out in my wallet, and I think there are 10 or 11 different things on that. It strikes me as it's too many things to be able to really execute on. But nonetheless, that's what she gave me. I committed to carrying it in my wallet every day, and I have it in my wallet right now. And it's a plumb line for her. Even though she's 31, it's an important plumb line for her. She probably has 60 years ahead of her, Lord willing. The more things you leave on that list, the more diffused your efforts and focus get. The hard work is to look it through, pray about it, and land on the top 5 or 6 or 7 that really matter to you. And that's a matter of choice. I mean, it's no different than when you go to the eye doctor and they put these things over your, and they ask you, is this better than that? Right? Isn't it surprise you, Doug, they still do that? And that's what this is about, is if you had to choose between this outcome or that outcome, what would you choose? Now, there is good guidance in the Bible about it. For example, one of my long-term metrics is to become someone who gives liberally. Well, that's a no-brainer because Jesus said it's better to give than to get. He already told us the outcome. So that's a no-brainer. One of my metrics is to worship God every day. That's experiential because that's where I find deep joy. It's a source of joy. But the harder one for me was my last metric, David, is to spend my life surrounded by beauty. And I crossed that off many times, but it was my personal board of directors that looked into my life and saw that beauty just fills me up. It's a huge part of who I am. And that one of them said to me, Lloyd, when you cross that off, you're denying how God made you. He said, and by the way, who do you think created beauty? Now that was pretty compelling, right, Doug?
Mm.
So beauty is the sixth metric for me, is to spend my life surrounded by beauty. So David, I would just encourage you to go on that journey, open up those words, those long-term answers to the question, if my life turned out perfectly, to your friends and get their input.
Yeah, I was also add to that, Lloyd. I just get a flood of ideas daily, and I've learned to write them down, and I've had to realize, there's not time to do all these things. And so I just ask for wisdom to prioritize properly, because I can only work on what's the very best that any one day. And I find, rather than meandering, things begin to take legs because they make sense, and the bad ideas tend to just fall to the bottom, and the better ideas and better thoughts and better direction tends to come to the top, because our time is limited. We've got to choose wisely.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, Lloyd, we don't have any more questions, so unless one gets popped in, we will wrap this one up early. Does that work for you?
Sure does. That's great. Hope everybody has a wonderful day. And if you're not clear on your calling, please reach out. There's nothing that our global team would love more than to help you get clear on your calling.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Lloyd, has the best way, if somebody wants to get in touch with you, how's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
I have just one email address. I always respond to it. So Halftime, it's at lloyd.reeb@halftime.org.
So Lloyd, thank you so much. It sounds like you made a special effort to get here this morning, and I appreciate you taking the time to prepare. I know you started weeks ago, so thank you for that. The audience, thank you for setting aside this much time today to spend it with us. So thank you again. Everybody have a great fall. Huncat says, Lloyd and Doug, thank you very much. Daryl says, thanks, Lloyd and Doug. Steve Hoffman says, thanks. And love it. Thanks so much. David says, thank you. So we appreciate everybody joining us. It's been great, and we'll look forward to doing this again next month. Bye-bye.